Pilipino. So, ito naman pong muli ang inyong lingkod, si DIY KKB Informative. So, ngayon, di na ako nakikiano yung mga bali-balita ngayon. Ang ano, halimbawa, yung sa ICI, yung sa flood control. Masyadong paulit-ulit na lang istorya, no? So, ngayon, ito, ang ating i-feature ngayon. Sino ba si Ninoy Aquino? Who is Ninoy Aquino? His heart and soul story that you cannot imagine. You can't imagine, no? Talagang ang hirap ng dinaanan ni dating senador Ninoy Aquino, no? So, napakahabang panahon ang kanyang pagdurusang kanyang dinanas nung siya nabubuhay pa, no? So anyway, ito yung ating tutunto. Ito yung ating tatalakayin at bibigyan ng komento, opinion sa tulong nyo mga kababayan ko, ano. At kumbaga, ewan ko kung siya ay nadeklara ng isa sa mga bayani, ano, pero naroon siya sa 500 pesos, ano. So talagang nung panoorin ko to mga kababayan ko, medyo bumalik sa akin yung alaala, no, nung 1986, no. So anyway, 1983, bumalik tayo sa 1983 at ang kanyang labi ay ipinarada dyan sa Maynila, particularly dito sa Ayala Boulevard o Ayala Avenue, dyan sa Makati. Dating Makati Rizal, ngayon ni Makati City na. So ayun mga kababayan ko, ang ating tutuklasin kung sino ba itong si Ninoy Aquino. Kilala ng mga Gen Z ngayon? I don't think so, no, kung napag-aaralan nila ang buhay ni Benigno Aquino na tinatawag nating Ninoy Aquino, no? The Filipino is worth dying for, no? So, alam naman natin itong si Ninoy Aquino ay isang liberal at naging senador nung time niya, no? Ng 1960s hanggang sa 1970s. Ay marami nagtatanong, sino ba itong Ninoy Aquino? Lalo na ibang hindi nakakakilala kay Ninoy Aquino na makikita nila sa 500 peso bill. Aba, sino itong si Ninoy Aquino? Sino itong si Corazon Aquino? No? Yun natin tutuklasin ngayon mga kababayan ko. Ako, medyo may alam ako ng konti sa kanilang mga istorya, pero mas malalaman natin dito sa history ito na ating pakikinggan ngayon dito sa tinig reaksyon na nagmumula kay DIY KKB Informative. So, mapagpalang gabi po sa inyo lahat, mga kababayan kong Pilipino mula Mindanao, Visayas at Luzon, at gayon din naman ang ating mga buhay na bayaning OFWs, uri ng magagawang Pilipino, magsasakat mga mangingisda. Shoutout po sa inyo lahat. So, simulan na natin mga kababayan ko, ano. At kung napadaan kayo dito sa ating YouTube channel, DIY KKB Informative, kung gusto nyo i-consider na mag-like, share and subscribe, it's up to you. It's down to me. So anyway, ating pong pakinggan, no, ang itong ating i-feature na ngayon na si who is Ninoy Aquino, life and soul, no, story that you can't imagine, no. Hindi talaga ma-imagine na ganito kahirap ang pinagdaanan ng ating dating senador na si Ninoy Aquino. So, Filipino is worth dying for. Yun yung nalaman natin noong 1986. So, ating na pong pakinggan, mga kababayan ko. Samahan nyo akong pakinggan ko ano yung tuloy na naging istorya niya sa buhay niya nung siya naririto pa sa ibabaw ng mundo. Ito po, maganda ba kanyang ginawa? Maganda ba o meron ba siyang nagawang maganda dito sa ating bansang Pilipinas? So, hindi ko sasabing oo, hindi ko sasabing hindi. Kayo na lang po ang humusga sa kanyang istorya dito sa ibabaw ng daigdig. Tuloy natin.
August 21. A day forever etched in the memory of
August 21, 1983. Talagang nagulintang ang taong bayan nun. Yung pagkasawi, pag-assassinate. August 21, 1983.
The name, Benigno Aquino Jr. age 50, clutched in his right hand a broken rosary. His mission, reconcile the Filipino people.
Nakapakabata niya, no? 50 anyos, no? So, 50 anyos na siya ng, ayon din sa narinig natin, 50 anyos siya ng mayapa. Sobrang bata pa talaga. Sobrang bata. No? So, anyway, alam naman natin na yung iba hindi pa alam ang buhay at kasaysayan ni Benigno Aquino Jr. Tinatawag nating Ninoy Aquino. So, tuloy natin.
Democracy.
Democracy.
Or assassins, still legally unknown. The government in power at the time, the dictatorship of Ferdinand Marcos. Earlier on, Mr. Marcos had proclaimed martial law, then locked him up 7 years and 7 months in Fort Bonifacio. The name on Ninoy's passport, Marcial Bonifacio.
Marcial Bonifacio. So, ginamit pala niyang pangalan sa passport niya, Marcial Bonifacio. Para bagang ano to si Marcial, ano to si Bonifacio. Alam naman natin si Bonifacio ang ating isa sa mga bayani ng ating bansang Pilipinas. At pinag-aawayan pa yan yung kung sino ang unang naging presidente. Si General Emilio Aguinaldo ba? O si Andres Bonifacio. So anyway, tuloy natin. Napakasalimot ito. Pakinggan nyo mga kababayan ko. Sit back and relax at ngat-ngat tayo ng mga ating makakain. Meron ba akong makakain dito? So anyway, napaka-importante na itong malaman nyo ang buhay ni Ninoy Aquino. Simula nung bata siya hanggang siya ay namayapa dito sa ibabaw ng daigdig. So anyway, tuloy.
Ninoy, no name in Philippine history has ever held the nation in such a grip except that of Jose Rizal. There was another riveting similarity. The fusillade that brought Rizal down at the Luneta triggered the Philippine Revolution against Spain. The bullet that snuffed out Ninoy's life spawned the bloodless EDSA Revolution on February 22 to 25, 1986. Each man, dying almost a century apart, brought out the best in the Filipino. Each had the same attributes: a superbly gifted mind, a bottomless passion for liberty, but most of all, courage. Courage to look the enemy in the eye, courage to brave every battlefield, courage to die for one's convictions. But while Rizal's life had been minutely and thoroughly researched by historians, what was Ninoy really like? Who was he? What made him tick? Behind the boyish, beatific smile the assassin's bullet could not efface, what forces drove Ninoy? Everybody marveled at his courage, his heart. Where did he get it? What spiritual wells nourished his soul? What was his magic? Why did 2 million mourners attend his funeral, the biggest such turnout in contemporary history? Tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands poured out into the streets in post-funeral rallies and demonstrations. Almost everything he touched was instant drama. Why? There are many answers like cross currents in a raging river. For Ninoy was not a simple person. But the first solid clue to his extraordinary courage, his burning desire to excel in everything he did, was the death of his father, Don Benigno Aquino, on December 20, 1947. The young Ninoy idolized his father, eyes twinkling with pride at every step as he carried his papa's portfolio as a boy. After the Second World War, the Japanese occupation, they accused Don Benigno of being a collaborator, a traitor. The charges seared like hot iron. Ninoy himself was taunted in the streets, in public plazas, in school. What really hurt was when an Ateneo High School teacher branded him the son of a traitor. The young Ninoy held his tears, but he swore. Silently, he swore his day would come.
Ngayon ko lang nalaman yun ayon sa kanya, pinaratangan ng Ateneo ng son of traitor itong si Benigno Aquino Jr. as in Ninoy Aquino. No? Ngayon ko lang narinig na pinaratangan siyang son of traitor. Mabigat yun. So anyway, tuloy natin.
What an Aquino really was. Courage is not for the asking, Ninoy once said. The heart lifts and the body throbs only when somebody else has the courage to die for his principles and convictions. Death was still far away when Ninoy did two things not long after his father's death, but they were to chart his destiny. Ninoy became a journalist and covered the Korean War, age 17 to 18. Then he married Cory Cojuangco, age 21. Journalism for Ninoy was like nectar from the gods of fate. As a reporter for the Manila Times, he learned how to write.
Grabe, di ba? Batang-bata siya, naging journalist na siya, 70 to 18 years old, ayon dito sa narrator, no? So, bata pa siya, nagsusulat na siya, journalist na. So, kaya nakakabilib din ng batang Ninoy Aquino, no? So, anyway, tuloy.
Capture the essence of life in print, as he later did in jail. That was another similarity between him and Rizal. Both were prodigious letter writers, each paragraph an exciting pulse beat in the historic drama, each played out to the very end. Coverage of the war in Korea brought the teenage Ninoy to the charnel house of what was outrageous in civilization. War among nations. Death was an everyday occurrence as Ninoy covered the exploits of the 10th BCT as guns snapped, artillery roared, bombs exploded. Ninoy saw comrades' distant body, limbs fly away, heads blown off. He was too young to be transfixed with horror, but the smell, the sight, the experience of death would stand Ninoy well in the years ahead. Marriage to Cory Cojuangco was a godsend. Highly educated herself, Cory had intellect, patience.
Ayun, napangasawa niya si Corazon Cojuangco Aquino, no, taga Tarlac. At sila pareho, I think pareho silang taga Tarlac, si Benigno Aquino Jr. at si Corazon Cojuangco Aquino. So, tuloy.
And understanding Ninoy needed. Cory and the 5 children were his
Uy,
haven,
5 yung pa niya.
sanctuary from countless battles he fought outside. And it came as no surprise that when the thunder broke into a tempest after Ninoy's death, Cory picked up Ninoy's torch and strode forth to battle. There was just one more step to take after the marriage to Cory. Enter politics. There was this burning desire in Ninoy to compensate. Compensate for what they did to his father, a politician himself. Compensate for every insult, every taunt to the Aquino name when the issue of Japanese collaboration was raised after the Second World War. Ninoy was also out to prove that public service was a public trust.
Public service,
The
public
name
trust.
Benigno Aquino would be synonymous with achievement, with sterling public performance and integrity. In politics, Ninoy would dazzle everybody. He was primus inter pares, first among equals. Here was Ninoy going faster, higher, stronger than everybody else on his level. Youngest mayor at 23, youngest provincial vice governor at 27,
Grabe, no?
youngest provincial governor at 28, youngest senator of the REM at 35.
Grabe,
Only the presidency remained. Looming over Ninoy was the formidable figure of President Ferdinand Marcos. Marcos was the politician par excellence. Marcos was cunning, astute, clever. Power, political power, was Marcos's forte, and he wielded it with the virtuoso skill of a master magician and a Tartar overlord. 15 years older than Ninoy, Marcos spotted his political quarry early on when Ninoy was the political kingpin of Tarlac. As fate would have it, Tarlac became the first dueling ground between the two. What was it about
Tarlac at saka Ilocos Norte, ano?
Tarlac was Hook, or communist territory. Tarlac was where Luis Taruk, commanders Alibasbas and Sumulo cast their spell on a large slice of the peasantry. Ninoy needed provincial peace, and together they struck some sort of a truce with the Hook leadership. There was something about Ninoy in Tarlac that caught the eye of Marcos. Ninoy fascinated him. Ninoy was a young political cougar who moved with almost effortless ease in the jungle of politics. In that jungle, Marcos was king, but he probably saw Ninoy as a terrific comer. At this early stage, Ninoy had to be won over, brought, or stopped. And thus began the political duel that would eventually convulse the Philippines, lead to martial law and Ninoy's arrest, and pave the way for the eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation between the man in the palace and the man in prison. In the first stages, Ninoy loved it. From a relative unknown nationally, he strode into the limelight as Marcos branded him a communist, if not a card-carrying communist, a communist cobbler. Ninoy himself said much later on, he had never been a communist, was not a communist, and never would be. But he relished those communist lightning bolts from Marcos. Why not? Here was the president, the great one, taking notice of him. And when the massacre at Plaza Miranda occurred on August 21, 1971, the minions of Marcos slyly suggested that Ninoy and the communists could have been behind it. For Marcos, it was uncanny. Instead of weakening Ninoy with charges that he was a communist, Ninoy's star continued to soar. Ninoy added insult to injury when he was the lone LP senatorial candidate to win the 1967 senatorial election. The awards came. The honors.
Kumbaga, siya lang ang nanalo noong 1967 bilang isang liberal party candidate. Siya lang ang nanalo noon, 1967, naging senador siya. At siya yung kaisa-isa na naging senador noong 1967 under Liberal Party.
Ninoy's was a virtuoso performance for a political Benjamin such as the Philippines had never seen. For 4 consecutive years, 1968 to 1971, he was voted outstanding senator by the Senate Press Club. For 3 consecutive years, he was voted outstanding senator by the Philippines Free Press. In 1971, he was chosen Man of the Year by the Philippines Free Press.
Man of the Year,
Headlines with the greatest of ease, often at Marcos's and Imelda's expense. The young senator drew blood with the Japida expose, brought down the House with revelations that Marcos owned audacity, luxurious mansions, had Imelda hopping man with his boutique sallies on the cultural center, got back to Marcos by claiming the president had itchy, vagabond fingers that juggled items in the national budget. Obviously, Ninoy had his eyes set on the presidency as the leading aspirant of the Liberal Party. Not very obviously, Marcos set about to foil Ninoy's bid by preparing secretly to declare martial law. Since the Constitution forbade him from running for a third term, Marcos must have realized he could feel nobody, not even his glamorous wife Imelda, to square off successfully against Ninoy. If the 1973 presidential elections were held, nobody doubted Ninoy would win. And so, on September 21, 1972, Marcos proclaimed martial law.
September 21st, 1972.
Marcos and Ninoy. To all intents and purposes, Ninoy looked like the loser, Marcos the winner. As the political rings of Marcos and his generals spread eagle the country, Ninoy was shunted into a 4 by 5 meter prison cell in the grim fortress.
Imagine nyo, sabi nga niya, 4 by 5 yung kulungan niya dun sa Port Bonifacio. Dito sa ngayon ni Bonifacio Global City, BGC. So, ang tanong doon, saan kaya doon? Siguro yung kanyang pinagkulungan doon, wasak na siguro. Wala na siguro doon dahil kinuha na ng BGC. Naging private property na yung BGC. Hindi na, dati kasing dati kasing pag-aari ng gobyerno. At yan ang kampo ng mga army ng Armed Forces of the Philippines. Pero ngayon, binenta na. I think may natirang konti doon sa bandaron, pero Marines na lang yata ang naroon. Marines sa malapit sa Nichols. Yun, Philippine Marines na lang yata naroon. Tapos naiwan, siyempre, yung libingan ng mga bayani. Nakaseparate pa doon yung pwesto ng libingan ng mga Amerikano. Separate yun. At saka yung libingan ng mga bayani na para sa Pilipino, no? Yun nga, no? So anyway, tuloy natin. Every April 9, naroon ako Kasi naroon si yung aking lolo na si Francis M, no? Anyway, tuloy.
Then appeared to the will that Ninoy be consigned to the book of Job, the triumphant Marcos to the book of Jupiter.
Okay. Bakit kasi ginawa niyo ng sound? Nakadistract. Ganda sana kung walang sound effect, no? May sound effect, no? Anyway, eto yung kanilang Eto kanilang
The greatest
tuloy.
punishment fate could inflict on Ninoy was to subject him to solitary confinement in this tiny prison cell. Outside, the whole wide world was Ninoy's stage. For Ninoy was larger than life. And his every move, every word, his every gesture held everyone in thrall.
I have been in solitary for 5.5 years, and you don't know, Mr. Naval, what is to be alone 24 hours a day. It is not true what Secretary Enrile said that I am free to roam around here. That's not true. I am brought out 1 hour a day to exercise, and I am brought back to my room. And
Grabe, sinabi raw ni Enrile na pwede raw siya mag-roaming around, pero wala. Nasa selda lang siya. 4 by 5 nga raw doon sa Port Bonifacio, yung pwesto ngayon ng Bonifacio Global City, So, nagsisinungaling pala. Ayon kay Ninoy Aquino na sinabi nga raw pwede raw siya mag-roaming around, pero hindi pala totoo yun. Then nagsinungaling si Enrile that time. So, anyway, tuloy.
for the last 5.5 years, I've been locked up alone in my room.
Alone in his cramped cell, unable in 7 years and 7 months to see the moon and the stars, Ninoy gradually realized he was in for keeps. His close prison mates were gradually released. Monching Mitra, Gino Roses, Soc Rodrigo, Teodoro Locsin, Max Oliven, Pepe Diokno, Laprama, and myself. Only Pepe Diokno remained to eventually share with Ninoy the terrible torment of Lau. But Diokno too was subsequently free after 2 years in Fort Bonifacio.
Ayun. Joke mo. Napalaya ako, 2 years.
Imprisonment taught me, well, I think it has tested the limits of my capacity, which is to me a tremendous benefit. Before being in prison, I did not know the limits of my capacity. I either overestimated myself or underestimated myself in many instances. I think after 7 years, now I have a better measure of myself. I know the limits of my patience, the limits of my tolerance, the limits of my endurance, the limits of my intelligence, of my comprehension, of my analysis. This is the thing that has given me here. That's why, mamamatit din tayo lahat. So there's really no sense in getting sore. I can look at problems more objectively. I could be free. When I saw Marco, sabi niya, Brad, I'll release you tomorrow. Nagkakawag. Ako, Mr. President, I want to tell you that if you're doing good and the people say you're okay, mananahimik na ako. Pero kung sabi ng mga ginagawa mo, talaga namang masama, ay mag-aaway din tayo at babalik mo rin ako sa Bonifacio. So unless you're ready to leave martial law, ay ako okay na lang sa akin. Noong araw, gustong-gusto kong talagang makalabas. At I want to be with my children, my family. Pero, naisip-isip ko, hindi na rin kakot maganda na itong katayuan na ito. Ayoko naman masabi na dumating ang panahon na nagkasubukan, nalalaki tayo. Masabi naman at least na meron pa namang tumayo at naghirap.
And so the prison bars grew tighter and tighter. The man in the palace presumably felt power would eventually break the man in prison. Ninoy was made to understand that all he needed to be free was to do one thing: scribble a message to Marcos that he was ready for a deal to cooperate with, to serve if he wished under the Marcos dictatorship. Ninoy refused, and thus Laul.
Napunta siya ng Laura, no? May siya.
Tinier cell awaited Ninoy. Laul was psychological torture of the worst kind. Not a hand was laid on him in
Sa Sierra Madre yata yun.
No pistol was thrust against his temple. No electrode was strapped on his nipples
Dahil siya na Bartolina.
to make him scream for mercy.
Sa Laor, Nueva Ecija.
Was defense. Laul was complete isolation from the world. Not even Cory or any member of the family or Senators Lorenzo Tamiaga or Jovito Salonga, Ninoy's top two lawyers, knew of Laul. For that matter, neither Ninoy nor Pepe Diokno knew they were in Laul except afterwards. In Laul, they stripped Ninoy of his eyeglasses, his watch, his wedding ring, his belt, his phone. Each day, he had to ask for
Yun ang
water.
wini-whisper niya.
Next, toothbrush, permission to go to the toilet from his guards. Laul was the agony of a man in the darkness, not knowing that the tomorrow would be death before a firing squad. Laul was a perpetual blindfold on what the next moment would bring. Laul was the feeling that every putrid meal was poison. Laur was Ninoy subsisting on soda crackers or biscuits. Laur was where Ninoy cursed the Filipino people, the leaders of the country, and even God. Laur was where Ninoy had no pencil, pen, or paper, where he could write his thoughts that spread like jungle fever in his tortured mind. He was later to write all these in a post-Laur diary. What terrible crimes have I committed to deserve this fate? The magnanakaws are living it up, and I, who tried to walk the narrow path of public service with integrity, am now about to meet an uncertain fate. Is this justice? But when I was placed in deep solitary confinement, nobody to talk to, I became desperate. And here I started to question the fundamentals of my belief. Firstly, is there really a God?
Yun. May Diyos ba?
Laur was where Ninoy himself said, cried like a baby, where he was sitting in a corner on the floor.
So, ibig sabihin talagang sukdulan ng talagang siya nagtanong, may Diyos ba? bakit ganito nangyayari sa akin? Hindi naman ako masamang tao, pero bakit ako nakulong ng ganito, no? So, doon na talaga siya nagtanong kung may Diyos ba. Pero, siyempre, meron naman talagang Diyos na may likha sa atin, no? Anyway, tuloy natin.
Now I'm going to die without talking to Cory. I won't see my children anymore. Laur was Ninoy losing so much weight, he had to hold up his beltless pants lest they slip to the ground. And yes, Laur was where Ninoy fought with all his might against going insane.
They brought me to a mountain hideout in the Sierra Madre and placed me in a box. I had only my brief and my t-shirt. I refused to eat because I thought they were poisoning me. There was nothing in the room, barely nothing. And I had nothing to do but twiddle my thumb. And for the first time in my life, I heard the ticking of every second, and I was counting every second into minutes. And as the minutes marched into hours, and the hours into days, and days into weeks, I knew what loneliness meant.
In a later letter, Ninoy wrote that to fight off the shadows of madness, he would walk daily around his cot, barefoot. And he would go back in memory as far as he could, back to his childhood days. And the remembrances would come in little ripples. And finally, the remembrances rolled into a big wave over to the present on Ninoy alone, forsaken and forgotten in Laur. Ninoy came close to the point of breaking, but he did not break.
When I was brought to Laur, where I had my great spiritual crisis in Laur, I started from the beginning and I disowned God.
Yun.
Bakit kang ganun kung merong Diyos bakit itong mga walang kasalanan naghihirap, yun namang mapagsamantalaan silang gumiginhawa?
Dumating talaga sa bola yung kanyang nawala na naghanap siya ng Diyos.
That was Laur finally met its match on the 14th day. He was then squatting on the floor when he saw, or thought he saw, the image of the Virgin Mother on the blank wall. He was later to tell a journalist in Boston, Arnold Zetlin, I don't know whether the Virgin Mary was trying to tell me, now look, you're just going through the faces of my son Jesus. First, you were joyful. You were born. You became a senator. You had pomp and glory. Why are you complaining? You already had pomp and glory. Now it's the sorrowful. Who knows if you survive the sorrowful thing? There's the glory again. Just go on with him.
Sabi nga,
And so Ninoy returned to the rosary. For 9 days he said the rosary almost all day long, and he prayed as he had never prayed before. Dear Lord, I just want to see my wife and children for 30 minutes. After that, I can die. On the 9th day, Cory and the 5 Aquino children came, and the captain of the guard said, Sir, you have 30 minutes. By some freak accident of fate, the young lieutenant in charge of Laur was Voltaire Gazmin. Now Colonel Voltaire Gazmin led the President Corazon Aquino's elite presidential security group. Ninoy was his godfather in marriage. The 9th day was April 8, 1973, 43 days after Cory saw Ninoy last in Fort Bonifacio. Cory related to Ninoy how Senator Tanyada wept publicly for the first time in his appearance before the Supreme Court. This was after Ninoy and Pepe Diokno disappeared from Fort Bonifacio. Tanyada begged to know where Ninoy and Pepe were. Were they still alive? Was Ninoy already dead? If he was still alive somewhere, could Cory was a page torn from Gulag Archipelago. Ninoy could not contain his tears. He later wrote in his diary, "I felt ashamed that Cory was the stronger one, and she kept telling me, 'You can do it.'" Cory recalls that Ninoy looked awful. His hair disheveled, his pants baggy, his t-shirt grimy. Ninoy told Cory that he felt death was just around the corner. He gave Cory instructions that almost amounted to his last will and testament, what to do with their properties. It was a strange and eerie spectacle. 2 rows of chicken coop stood between Ninoy and Cory and the kids. Behind Ninoy was an army photographer also clicking away. Cory gritted her teeth and framed up her resolve. Hindi kami patatalo. Elsie Aquino, the eldest child, told Ninoy, "Dad, our luck will change." So did Noynoy, so did Viel and Pinky. It was a family cheering squad, dauntless and unafraid, telling Ninoy not to lose hope, that despite all the sad things befalling the family, there was hope. Chris, then only 2 years old, would recall she saw her dad like an animal in a cage.
Chris Aquino.
The key word was hope. And with hope, also faith and prayer. As military cameras continued to click away, as military personnel close by glared at the proceedings, Ninoy and Cory agreed that no matter how often they prayed
Basta
the
tayo ng
rosary,
komento, meron ba ma? Ilan sila?
3.
3, okay. Thank you doon sa tatlong manonood natin. Thank you, sa pagtsatsagaan nyo sa aking istorya. Sa aking vlog.
Devil Dark Gamers, Katropa Vlog,
Okay.
Eugene Estiria. Yun lang. Hi.
Hi po sa inyong lahat. So, ito natin, ang istorya ni Ninoy Aquino. So, thank you doon sa tatlo nating viewers ngayon. At nagtsatsaga kayong pakinggan natin ng sabay-sabay kung ano ang life story ni Ninoy Aquino, no? Yung kanyang heart story. Heart and soul.
evening at 8, they would clutch the rosary beads in communion with each other.
Parang ganito yan, Kung kailan pinag-uusapan na natin si Ninoy Aquino, yung aking 22,000 subscriber. Wala, tatatlo na lang ngayon. Thank you sa inyong tatlo, Thank you.
How was he to know it was 8 p.m.? This did not present the problem. All day in Laur, he was praying the rosary. At 8 p.m., he was sure to be praying the rosary.
I now agree that man's reason has a limit. That's why he's man. That's why he's finite. And if he's man, then how can he comprehend which is not man, which is infinite? So that if you are finite and limited, you cannot possibly encompass what is unlimited. Man will have to go as far as reason will bring him, but at that point, at that abyss, you take a leap in the dark. It's a matter of faith. In other words, where reason ends, faith begins.
In prayer and in faith, Ninoy's tremendous vitality and energy turned inward in Laur. Where before he was a whirling political dervish with the world as his stage, in Laur the turning inward swept Ninoy into another world. The world of the spirit, the world of God. Laur was meant to break Ninoy, bring him to his knees, bring him with head bowed to the portals of Malacanang. The opposite happened.
But in the depths of my desolation, I discovered my
Ulo
faith
po,
and my
ulo na
God.
manok.
And it was only then that I realized I'm nothing. I realized that all the pomp, the glory of the Senate were ephemeral. That wealth, that clothing, keeping up with the Joneses was not of this world, really. And having discovered that, I have lost my appetite for power.
Meron siya.
Ninoy no longer relished political power as the end game of his life. the palace would still shoot his last bolt with the forthcoming court trial of Ninoy. But by this time, the man in prison had crossed his Rubicon. Nothing terrestrial held any terror for him anymore.
For 7 years, I was not allowed to see the moon and the stars. There were days when they left me all alone by myself. I had no reading material. I had nothing. I was twiddling my thumb. I would walk and walk and walk across my room. It's a room of about 4 meters by 5 meters. Hoping that I'll get tired. And then when I get tired, I will fall asleep. Knowing that tomorrow will be the same.
Wala kang kasama, Ninoy, no. Ngayon, ako naman may 22,000 subscriber, tatatlo na sila, Ninoy. Hindi ka nag-iisa. Pagka pinag-usapan yung iyong istorya.
And I often ask myself, bakit ka pa nagpapakahirap dito?
Yan.
In 73, a high official of the government asked me, endorse mo na lamang ang New Society, Ninoy. Ayos na. Ilalabas na kita. When I refused, they advised me, sumulat ka na lang kay Marcos. Ask for his forgiveness. O yun naman ka kung kasalanan ko, siya nagkasala sa bayan, bakit ako hindi ng tawad? My friends, I cannot understand the temerity and the gall of these people. Kang ganun, be practical. Talagang ganun Makibagay ka na napakalakas ka ng bagyo Ikaw lang ka mahihirapan diyan. Mag-isa ka dyan. Hindi balik kang ganun. Kung ayaw mo na sumulat, tumawag ka na lang sa telepono, ibulong mo na lamang. Ayos na. I would like to tell you that I was tempted in my almost 7,285 days in prison to do just that. I am only human. Ako po isang tao lamang. When my wife and children would visit me and they would leave me at task after 1 hour, I also would like to enjoy the embrace of my children and the peace of my home. But if I gave faith in that conviction, if I refused to accept the jurisdiction of a military court, and because I refused to defend myself, they will give me the death sentence, I vowed to myself that because you have elected me to the Senate and I gloried in its pomp, therefore it is now time that I must suffer the consequences of my act. And because I knew early on, and I discovered that there is a God who is just, na mayroong isang Panginoon na ibibigay sa atin ang ating kagandahang ginawa at paparusahin tayo sa ating kamaliang nagawa rin. It is because of that faith in my divine Creator that sustained me all these years.
4 months after the martial law government of Ferdinand Marcos filed formal charges of subversion, murder, and illegal possession of firearms against Ninoy. If Ninoy could not be broken in Lahore and had to be brought back to Fort Bonifacio, then the trial and the eventual sentence of death would finish him off. The trial was what Ninoy and his legal counsel predicted it would be. A kangaroo court, a mockery of justice, a travesty of due process, where Ninoy was depicted as a killer communist.
Many witnesses were paraded before me. I never saw them in my life. And yet they were pointing fingers at me, accusing me of crimes I never committed. They admitted to crimes. They said they were communists. They said they were number 3 in the communist hierarchy. And yet the government set them free, and I was in jail.
Ninoy was no more a communist than Ferdinand Marcos was. But communism was a dirty word, a swear word. Like Goebbels, the government repeated the charge of communism against Ninoy until it grew like a genie billowing out of the bottle. Lies repeated 1,000,000 times, speaking truth according to Goebbels.
But I knew somehow I will regain my freedom. Maybe not in this world, but elsewhere. And I knew that sometime, somewhere, Mr. Marcos and I will meet. And in that meeting, I will have my satisfaction.
In his opening statement for Military Commission Number 2, Ninoy announced he would boycott the trial. He said, "My act of non-participation is therefore an act of protest against the structures of injustice that brought us here. It is also an act of faith in the ultimate victory of right over wrong, of good over evil. In all humility, I say it is a rare privilege to share with motherland her bondage, her anguish, her every pain and suffering." And as the barrel-chested General Jose Sijuco and his commission members glowered at the defendant, Ninoy said, "Sirs, I know you to be honorable men, but the one undesirable fact is that you are subordinates of the President. You may decide to preserve my life, but he can choose to send me to death. Some people suggest that I beg for mercy, but this I cannot in conscience do. I would rather die on my feet in honor than live on bended knees in shame." It was during the trial that Ninoy staged a hunger strike. Nobody could stop Ninoy. It was Ninoy's way of protesting the unfairness of it all. Ninoy was told that hunger strikes could only attract attention if the press was free, if there was no dictatorship, if the weakening throb of his heart and the ravages wrought on his once robust body could be communicated to the world outside. Mahatma Gandhi's fast succeeded in arousing India and the world. The world press was right there at his bedside. For Ninoy, there was no press, or hardly any. What existed was the Ninoy of Laur, a shaft of spiritual steel, determined to look at death in the eye. In his April 6, 1975 letter to Soc Rodrigo, Ninoy wrote, "I have decided to challenge death. I do not believe I am sinning against my Creator because in the end, I'm not really my own executioner. By my example, I hope I can inspire others, like the dominoes want us to fall to create the chain reaction. Unfortunately, it is my sad fate to depart before the deluge." And to Cory, his mother, and his family, he wrote on April 14, 1975, "There comes a time in a man's life when he must prefer a meaningful death to a meaningless life. Let Mr. Marcos realize there are still Filipinos who are prepared to suffer and lay down their lives for a cause bigger than their own physical survival." During Ninoy's hunger strike, Cory filled the room
Hunger strike siya, no? 40 days and 40
She had
nights.
to be fearless as Ninoy was fearless.
Hindi siya kumain.
Persevering as Ninoy was persevering. Resolute as Ninoy was resolute. No tears rolled from her eyes as she nursed Ninoy day after day until she's weighed
Ano, walang music background. Di ko lang maintindihan.
to 123 pounds. Getting Ninoy to the bathroom was an ordeal. Cory placed 3 folding chairs between bed and bathroom like way stations. At each folding chair, Ninoy would sit down to rest, crank up enough strength from his already frail and faltering body. Then he would lean on Cory again, go through the same process. Like 2 desperate stragglers holding on to each other for dear life, lest separately they fall and be devoured by the swirling sands. At night, Cory would wake up to check if Ninoy was still alive. The situation was already hellish as it was, but the tormentors of Ninoy had something more up their sleeve. They would barbecue chicken or pork near his cell. The aroma wafted into his
Nga,
room,
ulo ng manok ang
and
ulam
Ninoy
ko.
could no longer be broken. The body had shrunk to a pitiful shell, but the heart was there, big as ever, cast into a spiritual iron laur. And Ninoy's soul was absolutely immune to the smell of chicken and pork barbecue. On the 30th day, Jaime Cardinal soon came to administer the final rites. On the 32nd day, the military rushed Ninoy to the Veterans Memorial Hospital. At the hospital, they force-fed him with dextrose as his blood pressure dangerously dipped to 60/40. On the 40th day, realizing that he had been force-fed, Ninoy broke his fast.
The question is, I am in good physical health, and when I went to hunger strike, what made me cause to stop after 40 days? Was it because I was afraid to die? I would like to be very candid this afternoon. I went on a hunger strike as a protest to what they did to me in the military commission. But more than a symbolic protest, I must admit I had a death wish. I wanted to die. And so I went on until I lost about 40 pounds. From 163, I dropped to about 127. And then I was rushed to the hospital. My mother cried, and my wife, naturally, my children, but I was determined. I felt that I've served a full life, and it was time to go. But somehow on the 40th day, I was struck by that letter of Father de la Costa to me. And he said, do you think by trying to die you are being courageous? He said, you're not being courageous, you're a coward. It is more courageous to go on living. You're opting out. You're escaping. And it's an act of cowardice. To continue living and to continue fighting. He said, it's more courageous. And ultimately he said, if you believe in the divine will, do not interfere with his
Ang
will.
hirap ng pinagdaanan ni Ninoy, ano?
Ninoy by then had received the information that Malacanang would stop his fast at the point when he was already a vegetable to keep him alive. To renew the fast would have been very dangerous.
After 7 years, I've lost my dogmatism. Nung araw I was so sure, of things. But after 7 years, of contemplation, there is really nothing sure in this world except death.
After Laur, after the hunger strike, Death and Ninoy had looked each other squarely in the face. Neither blinked. On the contrary, they parted like comrades in arms and agreed to another rendezvous, this time for always.
Yung music background kasi kaya hindi ka maintindihan, ano? Kaya maganda yung istorya ni Ninoy para makita ng taong bayan kung paano siya nagsakripisyo. Hindi para sa kanya, kundi para sa taong bayan, ang kalayaan. Baba ko lang.
Benigno S. Aquino Jr. This commission, in closed session, and upon secret written ballot,
Okay na.
5 of the members present at the time the vote was taken, concurring, sentences each one of you to suffer the penalty of death by firing squad.
Naku! Sintensya si Ninoy Aquino, ano? Death sentence, firing squad.
25, 1977, the military commission sentenced Ninoy to death by musketry. Marcos must have finally decided death was the most convenient way to settle the simmering years-long duel with Ninoy. Why not? By this time, who cared for Ninoy anyway? Many of his friends and followers had deserted him. At the rare parties to which the Aquinos were still invited, Cory and her in-laws found themselves alone at the table. The men and the women who prior to martial law had high praises for Ninoy had long joined the queue to Malacanang. Crestfallen, Cory and the rest of the Aquinos visited Ninoy at Fort Bonifacio after the death verdict. To their surprise, Ninoy was in high spirits. He assured them that Marcos would not make a martyr out of him, not yet. If he was going to die at the hands of his enemies, Ninoy said, it would be done in another way. True enough, Marcos suspended the execution and called for a re-investigation of the case. In the Philippines, there was little reaction, but abroad, particularly in the US and the West, the outrage against Ninoy's death sentence poured out like angry lava. Ninoy had become an excruciating dilemma of dictatorship. Alive, Ninoy was still a problem. Dead, Ninoy would also pose a problem. All right then, let Ninoy rot here in Fort Bonifacio. The stay of Ninoy's execution by firing squad was to be perceived as an act of presidential magnanimity. What mattered was power, and the Marcoses were then firmly and solidly in power. Across two oceans, the U.S. government generously gave its blessing to the Marcos dictatorship. Richard Nixon, Jimmy Carter, and Ronald Reagan successfully backed him up. So Ninoy again lapsed into oblivion. But not long afterwards, fate quickened. The 1978 Batasan Pambansa elections. Against an earlier decision of the political opposition to boycott, Ninoy decided to participate. Thus was born Laban, a ragtag group of
Unidos.
opposition candidates
United
with nothing but
Opposition.
patriotism in their minds, audacity in their hearts, and fire in their bellies. Thus was born the Laban sign of extended forefinger and thumb. It looked like a ludicrous, futile effort with Ninoy campaigning from jail. In the beginning, very few attended Laban rallies. The people were still scared stiff. But something happened. Marcos instructed then Defense Minister Juan Ponce Enrile to smite Ninoy on nationwide TV as a CIA agent. The charge was shocking, considering that Ninoy had earlier been convicted as a communist subversive. Ninoy asked for equal opportunity for rebuttal also on TV. Surprisingly, Marcos granted the request.
If you will recall, Secretary Enrile was the one who linked me to the CIA. But how can Secretary link me when he already has in his possession a letter saying that I've never been to the CIA? Now that is the contradiction in his part, not on my part. He claimed that there were monitored conversations here while in my room I was talking to a colonel and I claimed. Now these were bug conversations. On the basis of that, he now went to the press and says Aquino claimed he's a CIA agent. But if he already has a document saying that I have never been a CIA agent by the CIA himself, why did he ever bring it out? To embarrass me, to say that I'm a liar? In other words, I will no longer go into the hassle of all of the CIA business. I stand by the record of the CIA clearing me that I have never been a CIA agent or never been trained by them, so let it be.
Ninoy on TV was a revelation. Traffic in almost all of Metro Manila came to a dead stop as the citizenry stormed their TV sets to watch Ninoy.
You are a candidate of the Lakas Mong Bayan.
Yes.
And according to former Senator Rojas, you're not supposed to run, and they might
well, not impeach you, but take you out of the party.
I am very glad that you finally brought the needed commercial because I was afraid, I will miss this chance.
You got 1 hour and 30 minutes.
No, I would like to say that I was the one who originally proposed the national boycott. In fairness to to Senator Rojas and Salonga. That Friday morning at the Batasan Bayan, when they were meeting, and Governor San Luis of Laguna proposed black voting, I was so stunned that when Joby visited me at noon, I said, Joby, please issue a joint statement in our name, asking and urging our people for a national boycott. Because this is just too much. The government already has all the forces in its command. They have the entire machinery of politics which we do not have. Ngayon kako, bulok voting ka. Abi mamamatay naman kako tayo dyan. Yung bulok voting din, isinuka na ng matandang lipunan. Palala mo naman sa atin ng bagong lipunan. Huwag naman kakong ganon. So, this was the situation. Joby took my word for it, and he reported about my reaction, and they issued subsequently the press statement. Later on, I had to rethink. Paano naman kako kung pwede makipag-usap sa bayan kung hindi na ako kakandidato rito? Ako yun naman talagang kating-kating na makipag-usap sa bayan.
The intellect was there. Right.
What is the Indonesian?
Luminous.
And they were
The wit
bringing
was there.
goods to Indonesia,
Subtle.
and they were bringing
Rollicking and pungent. Why do you refuse to present evidence in the
beautiful.
court?
Mr. Marcos is the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Philippines. All of these generals are military officers. Mr. Marcos said I'm guilty by overwhelming evidence. He ordered me to jail for 5 years. If these officers will say I am innocent, it's just like saying Mr. Marcos is a liar. And they will never do that. All I ask Mr. Marcos is, send me before an impartial tribunal, not a military officer.
But you're projecting all this military.
Napaso na ako eh. If you attend that Dogon mission, we stand up, hindi ka pa nakakatayo denied ang motion mo siyempre mga general yan pag nagalit si Apo sa kanila, direktirado na sila.
But, sir, wouldn't you think that by making a statement such as that, you're really questioning the integrity of all these men?
No, it is a circumstance, Ronnie. Kamukha mo, empleyado ka ng NNPC, maataking pa si Marcos? Hindi pwede.
Oh, no.
Na nga.
And most of all, the heart was there. As a result, the Laban rally started to pick up like swollen water breaking the pipes. The ever-bulging Laban crowd swarmed into the April 6 noise barrage. It was a sight to see, a sound to hear, that noise barrage. It was one huge electrifying boom of
So mga kababayan ko, yung ating mga natirang mga viewers ay ibig ko lang pong ipadinig sa inyo kung sino tong si Ninoy Aquino, na meron tayong isang Pilipino na nakipaglaban para sa kalayaan ng sambayan ng Pilipino. Hindi para sa kanyang kalayaan. Tingnan nyo nga, nag-hunger strike nga siya, parang wala na siyang pag-asang mabuhay dahil nga iniisip niya ang kalayaan, ang tunay na kalayaan ng bansang Pilipinas. Ito po, tuloy.
Hanging cans tossing and empty gasoline cans rattling. Tens of thousands raced all over the city, shouting the name of Ninoy, flashing the Laban sign. The jubilation was short-lived. On election day, April 7, Marcos pulled out all the stops. The communists, he said, orchestrated the noise barrage. The nation had to be saved. And so it was Marcos fashion. Not one Laban candidate made it in the counting, despite several surveys that showed Ninoy as a top-notcher. Marcos pulled out the most potent weapon from his political arsenal. Fear. Fear and the communist bogey. Fear of arrest. Fear of harassment, intimidation, persecution. Laban campaign manager Lorenzo Tañada led the Death of Democracy March from Quezon City to the Manila Cathedral April 9, 1978. The march expected to pull in thousands of supporters along the way. This time,
Binatilyo na ako
nobody
nun.
dared to join the marchers,
2017.
numbered about 500. Fear gripped Manila anew. When Tañada and the marchers were arrested along España and shunted into buses, hardly anybody bothered to look their way. The man in the palace had won his bet. Whoever said the Philippines was a nation of cowards must have been right. So Ninoy was forgotten again. not before he demonstrated that Filipinos could be roused.
So, Ninoy Aquino forgotten again. No, ngayon, nakakalimutan na naman siguro ng taong bayan kasi nga matagal na rin nangyari to, no. Hindi pa alam to ng mga Gen Zs. So, kung alam man nila, wala silang pakialaman na sa nangyari nung araw. Yung sinakripisyo ni Ninoy Aquino ang kanyang buhay upang makamit ang kalayaan ng bansang Pilipinas. Troy.
Touched, if only for an instant. There was something else about Ninoy. Somewhere in his psyche, he had a soft spot for Ferdinand Marcos. Ninoy believed that whatever Marcos had done to him and to his family, Marcos still had a sense of history. That Marcos cared for whatever history and posterity would say about him. That Marcos could be talked to. That presumably Marcos could link hands with him and together they could restore democracy.
This struggle can only mean victory for all of us. It will mean victory because we are different from those that we oppose. Those that we oppose are happy with the material wealth. But for how long? I have written Mr. Marcos letters upon letters and I told him, read your history, my friend. I have no hatred for you. I only have pity because if you do not see and you do not remove the calluses from your eyes, if you do not remove your blinders, you will meet the same fate of all the dictators of history. What happened to Mao Zedong? His wife is now in jail. What happened to Peron? Isabelita is now in jail. What happened to Franco is now forgotten. What happened to the Shah? For all of the things that he did, the monuments to his greatness have already been torn down. There has never been a single dictator in history that has lived forever. And so I tell Mr. Marcos, study the lessons of history before it is too late.
And so when the dictator allowed Ninoy out on a furlough October 11, 1979 for his and Cory's 25th wedding anniversary, Ninoy developed his rendezvous with history formula. As visitors once again streamed to his Quezon City residence, Ninoy openly advocated the formation of the Council of Elders. The council would overhang the Marcos government as a supreme advisory body. A coalition government, including the opposition, would follow. National elections would be held. So Ninoy waited for Marcos's call. They were to rendezvous at a neutral site, two political giants joining hands. The historic rendezvous never materialized. It was an impossible dream. Ninoy returned to Fort Bonifacio. An important man came to call, General Fabian Ver. Ver told Ninoy he was wrong about the president having lupus. Ver said the president was as strong as ever. Ver gently told Ninoy that Marcos was not buying his historic rendezvous idea. And so the cobwebs of opinion gathered anew around Ninoy's Fort Bonifacio cell. There were talks, even negotiations about a possible exile to the U.S., but they petered out. Some close advisors of Marcos feared that Ninoy in America would be a political bullet on the loose, a mischief maker who would use the CIA to stage a Bay of Pigs assault on the Philippines. That was the tragedy of the Marcos philosophy. The man in the palace could never believe that Ninoy had changed, that Ninoy really wanted to help him. The tragedy of Ninoy's spiritual philosophy was his insistence that Christ existed in every man, that given a chance he, Ninoy, could bring out the son of Nazarene in Ferdinand Marcos.
Mr. Marcos is a human being, and Mr. Marcos has a conscience. I may even concede that in his own fashion he thinks he's doing right. It is therefore our duty and our obligation to enlighten him. It is our duty and our obligation to tell Mr. Marcos that maybe he's wrong. But definitely, Mr. Marcos is a human being, and I have not lost hope that we can still reach him in the recesses of his conscience.
The truth was, for Marcos, power was the
Yan, mga kababayan ko. Kaya nga, eto, binlog natin upang nang sa ganun, ang hindi nakakaalam ng istorya ni Ninoy Aquino ay kahit man lang sa ating mumunting YouTube channel, DIY KKB Informative, ay atin pong naipapatunghay sa inyo. Actually, marami na akong alam sa istorya niya, pero itong istorya to ay halos kompleto na. Yung inanarrate nitong isang ating kaibigan na nag-YouTube din, ano. So ito ginawa niya 2016 niya, 2013, ganun pala, sorry 2013, no. Nung nanunungkulan pa at nasa posisyon pa yung kanyang anak na si Ninoy Aquino. So masaklap ang kanyang naging buhay. Kumbaga, hindi niya inalintana ang kanyang sariling kalayaan, kundi ang kalayaan ng bansa. So, sabi nga niya, ay ipuin natin ang konsensya ng Pangulo upang sa ganun human being siya meaning to say, meron pa rin siyang natitirang magandang kalooban na nakatanim sa kanyang puso at damdamin. So, anyway, basa tayo ng komento. Ilan na lang sila, ma? Tatlo. Thank you dun sa tatlo na talagang narito pa rin tayo. Salamat sa inyo.
Jesus Olaguer, Sak Diary, Jan Conley, hi.
Hi po, hi sa inyo, no? So, thank you sa inyong komento. At yun nga, sabi ko nga sa inyo ay tayo patuloy na, kumbaga kung na-vlog na natin si Andres Bonifacio, si Emilio Aguinaldo, si Juan Luna. Ito naman, latest, after martial law siya nakulong. Tapos, I think that 1970 o 80 ay siya ay nagkaroon ng sakit sa puso at nagkaroon siya ng pagkakataong humiling sa Pangulo na siya ay dalhin sa Philippine Heart Center. And then after nun siya ay ma-diagnose na meron pala siyang 3 bara sa kanyang puso, ay pumunta to si Imelda Marcos ayon sa kanya na meron ng eroplano dyan na umaga, kinausap niya, meron dyan 6 p.m. pwede ka lumipad na sa Amerika upang na sa ganun mag-ano ka mag-under ka ng heart bypass, no? So anyway, tuloy natin. Kaya siya nakapunta ng Amerika Tapos 1981 bagay siya nagsalita doon sa Los Angeles at yun nga yung speech niya kung natunghayan nyo nung nakaraang kong vlog yun nga salita siya doon at marami siyang sinabi na si Mr. Marcos daw ay isang tao lamang, may konsensya pa naman at yun ang kanyang tinutumbok ang kanyang konsensya. Kaya nga lamang po dumating yung panahon na siya umuwi noong 1983 at marami pumipilit sa kanya na huwag ka na umuwi. Huwag ka na umuwi dahil may assassination plot sa iyo. Pero bilang isang Pilipino ay tumuloy pa rin siya. At yun nga, nangyari ang hindi dapat mangyari. So tuloy natin yung istorya.
ultimate fix, power at the very top. Secretly, he may have admired Ninoy for Marcos respected men of courage, of vision, of tenacity. Napoleon was an idol of Marcos, and Marcos reveled in Napoleon's famous quote, "A great man comes from the encounter between a great mind and a great opportunity." So the days and the weeks fell like autumn leaves for the man in prison. If he was to languish forever in jail, so be it. But fate again had a calendar that neither Marcos nor Ninoy anticipated. On March 19, 1980, while jogging outside his cell, Ninoy had a heart attack.
Ayun na.
Well, they allowed me to run, and they made a little corral for me. They brought me out between 11 and 12 o'clock. Every day, they brought me out to exercise. On that particular day of March, As I was walking around my little corral, all of a sudden I developed a chest pain. And then the pain was so terrible that I sat down and I asked my guard to massage my chest and asked him to bring me back. I called for the army doctors. They checked me and they said, muscle spasm lang po yan. That's nothing. Just take a rest. And so I rested. But after 40 days, I was so weak, I could not even take a bath. I was shaking. And I told my doctor, I said, look, doctor, I don't know, I said, your diagnosis or its accuracy, but I am very, very weak. Please bring me to the Philippine Heart Center and get me an examination.
Yeah.
That doctor, fortunately, on that morning, after 40 days, on April 10 to 28, his name is Colonel Bayani Garcia, came to my office and said, yes, Senator, sabi niya, I will now recommend that they bring you to the Heart Center because apparently you're not getting well. Mr. Marcos has just arrived from Honolulu. I will make my recommendation. And I wrote a letter and I told them, if you do not bring me to the Heart Center, I will be constrained to appeal to the Supreme Court. And so he said, no, sir. Ako na pong bahala. I will talk to the Commanding General. At 1 o'clock that day, a knock on my door came and I was given a letter from the Commanding General. I thought it was the approval of my request. When I opened the letter, it was handwritten note and it said, my dear Senator Aquino, it is with deep regret that I inform you, your Dr. Colonel Bayani S. Garcia died of a massive heart attack an hour ago.
Namatay sa akin.
If you were in my place, here is your doctor telling you it is a muscle spasm, tapos bigla siya namatay. How would you feel?
Yeah.
Finally, on May 5, 1980, almost midnight, they took me from my cell and they brought me to the Heart Center.
Yun.
That was a Monday. The doctors at the Heart Center met me, took preliminary tests, and they told me, Senator, they said, tomorrow we will begin the battery of tests. And so I slept, but I could not sleep. That was the first time I was brought out of my cell in almost 7 years and 7 months. And there were beautiful nurses, and the first time I was seeing women in 7 years and 7 months. And naturally, I was watching my heart as it was palpitating.
Joke.
But as I sat down after that X-ray, I was just about to sip my coffee. All of a sudden, I got hit again by a terrible chest pain that was almost choking me, and my arm was getting paralyzed. So I told the nurse, I said, Miss, please bring me to bed. So they brought me to bed, and they put all of those gadgets. And all of a sudden, the needles were squiggling. And they called the doctor. The doctor looked at the tracings, and then after 1 hour, they came back to me and said, Mr. Senator, we are canceling all tests. I said, why? Because we already know what's wrong with you. I said, what's wrong with me? You have blocked arteries.
Yun.
And you must undergo an emergency triple bypass. Otherwise, you may die in 6 days to 6 months. I told them, where can I have my operation? Ito lang po, sa Heart Center. And that's the Heart Center of Imelda Marcos.
Then,
And I asked, who can do the operation for me? The director said, ako lang po. There are 2 other assistants if you want, but I'm the only one performing in the center. He was the director of the Heart Center, handpicked also by Imelda. I said, Doctor, pagpaliban mo na ka ako. Thank you na lang. I said, if they cannot operate on me in America, please bring me to my cell. The truth is, I did not want them to touch me in Manila. And so there was a crisis. The Deputy Minister of Defense came to my room. He tried to talk me out of my decision. I said no. And so finally he said, are you willing to write a letter to Marcos requesting to be brought to America? I said yes. Eh siguro kang ganun, mas maganda kung mag-iwan ka ng 2 anak mo para maniwala na babalik ka.
Elime yung anak.
And so I wrote my letter to Mr. Marcos and made 2 covenants. That if I leave, I shall return. And 2, that while in America, I shall not speak out against his regime. And I also said, I will only bring 3 of my children with me. That's also true. But of course, the other 2 were already abroad.
Nakaka-fake na, no? Okay, ah.
then, my friends, that was a Wednesday when I wrote that letter. All of a sudden, on Thursday morning, May 8th, my wife visited me early in the morning and she told me, the hospital is crawling with Metrocom cars. Guards all over the place. Baka kami magbibisita sa'yo. Then all of a sudden, my guards started jumping, putting their barong Tagalog, hiding all of their guns. I said, tama, may darating na VIP. And then lo and behold, the beautiful one ascended into my suite.
Sino?
She came,
Melda.
and she was really beautiful.
Melda Marco.
She has not aged. And she sat down and said, naku Ninoy, sabi niya, I'm sorry to see you like that. Hindi ko lang nasabi sa kanya, kayo may kagagawa nito. At any
Okay.
rate, I had my bathrobe and I was like this, and she talked to me and to her, and she was very nice about it. And then all of a sudden, after 1 hour, she said, would you like to go to America? Sabi ka ko, sure. Oo. Eh, sa tuwa ko, tinanggal ko pa yung aking kwintas, kakuanting-anting ko ito, iwanan ko nakaprepare dito. Palayasin na niyo ako, pumunta niyo ako sa Amerika. Sabi niya, there's a plane leaving at 6 o'clock. You can be in that plane.
Ochi, ano no?
A 3.5-hour triple heart bypass, Ninoy was a new man. Dr. Rolando Solis, one of the heart specialists in attendance at Baylor, would later marvel at Ninoy's heart. During a bypass, it is necessary to pour ice water on the heart to stop it from beating while the heart was being attached to a heart-lung machine. Despite the first deluge of ice water, Ninoy's heart continued to beat. Another deluge was necessary before it would stop.
I have been asked by many people, what is the actual situation in the Philippines? I think these Japanese explained the situation in the Philippines very well. As you very well know, the Japanese have a difficulty pronouncing their R's. Manila becomes Manira. And so this Japanese gentleman stood up and said, my dear Filipino people, you are very lucky. And I consider, he said, the Filipino people the most lucky people in Asia. And the people were, of course, surprised, and they wanted to know why they were lucky. He said, you know why you are lucky? You have a president who robs you, and you have a first lady who robs you more.
Grabe. Lapi na girabo no?
The 3 years in Boston were the best 3 years the Aquinos ever experienced as a family. Ninoy did his level best to make up for the 7 years and 7 months that he was in Fort Bonifacio.
While it's true, Mr. Marcos, I said that after my 8 years in prison, I have lost appetite for office.
So kung ako ganito. So kung nasa States na siya at naroon na pati yung pamilya niya, dapat umano na lang siya, no? Nanirahan na lang siya doon sa Amerika. Siguro humaba pa buhay niya. Kaya lang dahil nga sa pagmamahal niya sa bansa, sa taong bayan, mga Pilipino, umuwi siya. Pero yun nga yan, no? Ngayon nakagawa siya ng mabuti sa bansa at napatalsik nyo yung itong diktadurang Marcos. Tapos ngayon, nakakalimutan nyo na naman si Ninoy, no? Nakakalimutan nyo na naman si Ninoy. Kaya nga, kung babalik lang ang panahon, ano, pwede ko i-suggest kay Ninoy na diyan ka na lang. Kumbaga, yan naman na lang yung buhay mo sa iyong pamilya. No? At kayo naman malaya dyan sa Amerika, pwede ka magpapunta-punta kung saan. So, huwag ka nang bumalik sa Pilipinas. Pero hindi ganun ang ginawa ni Ninoy. Ano? Bumalik pa rin siya sa Pilipinas para sa pagmamahal at kanyang mithiin na magkaroon ng kalayaan ng bansang Pilipinas. Anyway, tuloy.
Seeking the presidency of this land. I'm not seeking any more any office in this country. But believe me, I said when I tell you that while I have vowed never to enter the political arena again, I shall dedicate the last drop of my blood to the restoration of freedom and the dismantlement of your martial law.
Ano? Kumbaga, dahil sa kanya pagmahal sa bansa, kumbaga, napuwersa ang Marcos na ilip ang martial law. Nawala ang martial law, no. Oh, anyway, siguro hindi alintana ng mga Pilipino yung nangyari kay Ninoy nun. Tuloy.
For 2 hours so he could escort Chris to a movie.
Sacrifices.
2 years
Wala
as a
rin
fellow
naman.
in Harvard University Center for International Affairs and 1 year as a fellow in the Massachusetts Institute of Technology did more wonders for Ninoy's already prodigious mind. In Fort Bonifacio, Ninoy must have read anywhere from 2,500 to 3,000 books and other reading materials. This was the most encyclopedic political mind the Philippines had ever known. At Harvard, Ninoy refined his philosophy of nonviolence, of Christ being present in other men. Among others, he read Jean Stark, Dietrich von Hofer, Reinhold Niebuhr, Thoreau, Tolstoy, Gandhi, Martin Luther King. All of these authors exalted non-violence. Like Ninoy, a number of them had been in prison, where they were divested of all earthly pleasures and passions. But once out of prison, they did not seek revenge against their tormentors. The frail and ascetic Gandhi pushed serenely forward, even as nightsticks, rifle butts, and machine gun bullets felled his followers. Non-violence was to consume Ninoy even more passionately.
I've always said that Mr. Marcos is the original terrorist. He is right now employing state violence. But if we use violence against him, he will only justify the use of more violence against us. And since he's a more violent man, he has more forces of repression, we will be the loser. In other words, as Gandhi said, if he uses violence against you, do not give him a reason to justify his violence. Because if you're not violent, then before the bar of public opinion and before God, he's the only sinner.
Gradually, he began to feel in his bones that one day he would return to the Philippines and resume his duel with Marcos on ground level. Wherever he went in Boston and in the U.S., Ninoy was a big hit and a charmer.
Very simply, Christian socialism means to me an equal opportunity for advancement and the full development of the human being. This means that the poorest person in the land must be given the equal opportunity for education.
Tama.
Number two, the Christian socialist believes that the great legitimizer of government is the ballot, not the bullet. And therefore, because we believe in the ballot, we believe in a majority rule. So that if the majority should opt and should win in a contest,
Yeah.
then the minority should accept the majority mandate.
Kaya nito ni Bam Aquino, yung ganito yung style ni Ninoy Aquino. Ewan natin, tingnan natin. Kasi nakapokus si Bam Aquino sa edukasyon no? So ito rin yung sinasabi nga ni Ninoy na kailangan kahit pinakamahirap ka, kailangan may opportunity na mag-aral. No? Ewan natin kung ano mangyayari kay Bam Aquino kung kaya niyang gawin. Yung, I think tiyuhin to pamangkin yata ni Ninoy Aquino to si Bam Aquino. No? So, tingnan natin in the future kung ano magagawa niya.
But we put a pulatilla that the majority, even if it wins, must respect minority rights. Number three, we do not believe in the exploitation of man by man. Meaning, we do not believe in unbridled capitalism where the rich will get richer and the poor will get poorer. In a developed country in America, you may have capitalism. But in a country like the Philippines with very meager resources and a developing economy, we must harness our meager economy and maximize their benefit. And therefore, there should be centralized economic planning and the government must actually give the direction as to prevent any overlap. And finally, I do not believe in the monopoly of basic industries. Why should one family monopolize one electric company in the Philippines? Or why should one family monopolize the ownership of one airline company in the Philippines? Or why should one company monopolize the telephone company in the Philippines? Since the government is funding all of this to begin with, these families are borrowing from government institutions depend on government guarantees, then I say, let the government own them and let the people share in the profit. Christian socialism, therefore, is nothing more than democracy.
Diba? Yung sinabi niya. Pagkakaintindi ko, ganito. Yung mga naglalakihang mga kumpanya, kumbaga, may government guarantee pag uutang sila sa mga bangko ng gobyerno. So, ibig sabihin, parang sa aking pagkakaintindi po, opinion ko at analisa, ginisa tayo sa sarili natin mantika. Yung mga naglalaki ang kumpanya na yan. Uutang ka sa gobyerno bangko ng gobyerno, tapos ngayon, may sovereign guarantee ka, government guarantee na pag hindi ka nakabayad, ang gobyerno magbabayad. Ano kaya yun? No, sa sarili kong analisa, no, parang ganun. So why not, sabi nga niya, bakit hindi na lang yung gobyerno umutang sa pera ng gobyerno at maglikha ng mga iba't ibang mga negosyo dito sa Pilipinas, no? Kaya nakapagtataka rin, ano, bakit ganun nangyayari sa atin ngayon, ano? Pautangin ng gobyerno natin ng puhunan, tapos at pag nalugi, gobyerno rin magbabayad. Kagaya nangyari sa, ano, sa Meralco nung araw, nung hawak pa ni Lopez yung Meralco, di ba? Sabi nga ni Makoy nung araw, Makoy Sr., na hindi na nakakabayad ang Lopez. So, kukunin ko na ang Meralco. So, kinuha niya. No? Kasi ang utang ang utang galing sa pera ng gobyerno, taxpayers money. Tapos ngayon, tayo magbabayad. Kaysa magbayad tayo, kunin ko na lang uli yung Meralco. And then after that, ito nga ang masaklap na pangyayari. Ano? Yung sinasabi ni Ninoy Aquino na ganito, ang katanungan nga natin, bakit binalik? Allegedly, binalik daw ni Cory Aquino ang Meralco sa mga Lopez. Bakit kaya? Yon ang katanungan natin. Na hindi niya siguro narinig itong talumpati ni Ninoy Aquino, no? Ang asawa niya.
Head of Harvard's fellowship studies was amazed at the scope of Ninoy's mind. So were doctors Stanley Hoffman, Lucian Pye, David Steinberg, many of whose writings Ninoy had already read in Fort Bonifacio.
The Philippine bases in the Philippines. In the Philippines, we maintained, however, that rentals must be collected along the Spanish model. But let me divide the question. Firstly, I believe that when it comes to foreign policy, both the majority and the opposition should not wash their dirty linen in public. And therefore, I suggest a bipartisan approach to foreign policy. In other words, we should not be talking outside, where our negotiating opponent will be using both ends against the middle. I think that is against Filipino interests. So that we should have a working agreement among ourselves before we go out. I am therefore in agreement with the Philippine government's position that we should assert our sovereignty on this basis, that we should collect rentals. Now, why do I say this? It is true that the United States government has been giving us military aid for the last 30 years under the Mutual Defense Assistance Pact. But it's also true that the Philippine Army has been the most neglected armies in Asia by the United States for the simple reason that we are not a frontline army. And so I said, rather than continue a situation of this nature, may we therefore ask the United States government that they rentals for these bases so that with these rentals we can now update the position of our armed forces, we can have our own missile batteries, we can have our own missile frigates, we can have our own modern weaponry, rather than go out with our hands out, so that this will be a quid pro quo basis.
Dr. Brown would relate after Ninoy's death that no conversation, no subject, or important event ever escaped Ninoy's multifaceted mind. Even as we would discuss American history, Dr. Brown said, Ninoy would chime in with his incisive grasp of the subject. Cory would also recount that at one time Ninoy and she were invited to dinner by a group of American businessmen. They were just so amazed, said Cory, that Ninoy knew more about American history than they. Ninoy also related to journalists in Boston how Marcos envied him his erudition. I envy you, Ninoy quoted Marcos as saying, because you have all the time in the world. At your fingertips, you have the greatest symphonies available to you, the greatest books, which are not available to me because all my working hours are spent with people. Here you are with the greatest luxury of the greatest minds in the world.
And so I told Mr. Marcos, negotiate now when you are still in a position to dictate terms. In other words, it is always good to negotiate when you are still strong. Do not wait when you're ready to wait, because by then, they'll be asking for your blood. And because it's brilliant, I anchored my thesis on that point. But then most probably I'm going against the tide of history because no dictator has ever yielded power voluntarily. And so I put the kicker, Mr. Marcos, be unique, be the first tyrant, and set the record.
3 meetings with Imelda Marcos in New York failed to alter Ninoy's course. Imelda offered him prestige, money, if only he would recant. Even some State Department officials at the time felt that Ninoy's return to Manila would just rock the boat of U.S.-Philippine relations. Marcos was their ally, and Ninoy was an interloper. Ninoy told the Agence France-Presse in an interview, "I don't think the Americans trust me. They're not sure about me, what I would do, what would be my actuation if ever I should become president, and so they cannot be sure I am their boy."
The United States has given Mr. Marcos 4 times more military aid since martial law. Today, it is giving Mr. Marcos 6 times more aid. And if you look at the record, Mr. Marcos was able to borrow almost 8 billion. And most of this came from American-assisted organizations like the World Bank and the IMF. And therefore, you cannot blame my countrymen when they feel that the Americans are tilted in favor of Mr. Marcos. Our plea is very simple. We are all your friends. America is not our enemy. But please do not help our dictator because it will make our job harder. All we want you to do is stay out. If you cannot help those who are oppressed, in as much as or in spite of the fact that you claim you're the home of the free, or the land of the free and the home of the brave, if you cannot even help us, then at least do not hurt us.
Finally, it became clear that Ninoy was coming home. The earlier muffled roll of distant drums, that he was returning now hit Malacanang like a thunderclap. Ninoy had to be stopped at all costs. The orders were out. All international airlines were warned against airlifting Ninoy to Manila or else. Imelda warned against possible assassination. So did Defense Minister Juan Ponce Enrile. In an urgent cable, he counseled Ninoy to come home only when the danger had passed. Cory and the children bowed to Ninoy's decision, but the other members of the huge Aquino clan, particularly his mother Doña Aurora, were aghast and against. By this time, the spiritual strength of Ninoy had reached the mountain top. The spectral voice of danger, assassination and perdition bounced off the man who surveyed the valley below. This time, he and
Parang naalala ko tuloy kay Tatay Digong, no? Nag-meeting pa sila sa Hong Kong, tapos pinauwi si Tatay Digong, yung pala para ipakulong, pagkatapos dito, inilipad sa bansang Netherlands, ano? So, dito naman kay Ninoy, sana hindi na siya umuwi, baka buhay pa siya. Kay Tatay Digong naman, sana hindi na siya umuwi, baka hindi pa siya nakulong sa ICC, ano? Anyway, yan ang mga opinion natin, komento at analisa, no? Na dapat di na sila nag-uwian.
would go to the edge of the cliff, and there, the future of the Philippines would be decided.
Tignan nyo, paano nakakalimutan si Ninoy, ganun din, nakakalimutan nyo na si Tatay Digong. No? Anyway, may kanya-kanya tayong buhay. Ganyan, music, ganda sana pakinggan, no? Walang music, ano? Na-copyright to, burado to.
The reasons for Ninoy's return were simplicity itself. After 20 years of Marcos, the Philippines had dug itself into a huge foreign debt. The economy was in rags. Ninoy said that whoever would succeed Marcos needed 10 years to enable the Philippines to recover from the economic holocaust.
I am going back to the Philippines, and if I have to go back to jail, so be it.
But even more forbidding was the communist insurgency. Ninoy dreaded the day that the flags of Marxism, Leninism, the hammer and the sickle would ever fly over the country. Wherever the communists were in power, he said, the traffic of refugees was always from east to west. Ninoy saw the NBA just down the road, ready to blow up the Philippines and bring in civil war. While there was still time, the communists had to be stopped. Ninoy also surmised that the health of Marcos was about to take a tailspin, that before long he would no longer be his own man, that the generals would take over and bump off Imelda. So Ninoy had to return to be in on the ground floor, to help diffuse the political
Yung music
climate.
background kasi
And
nakaka-addict siya.
hope, for hope had gone, and the smell of drift and decay was everywhere. Ninoy also had to return for that 1 hour one-on-one with Marcos. For that 1 hour, he said, I am laying my life on the line. To many who argued that Filipinos were not worth saving because precious few had the courage to fight the dictatorship, Ninoy replied, I have weighed carefully the virtues and faults of the Filipino, and I have come to the conclusion that he is worth dying for because he is the nation's greatest untapped resource. To his younger sisters, Lupita and Desi, who told him even their close friends suffered instant diarrhea at the mere mention of Ninoy's name, he replied, even if only 10 Filipinos would rise and join, my return would be worth it. But there was another element to Ninoy's decision to return. He correctly diagnosed that in any inventory of traits Filipinos admire most, courage would go up the flagpole more than any other. He was right. In a pre-return interview 3 weeks before he died, Ninoy said,
So they say,
Filipinos respect and admire courage best of all. Well, I'm going home. I'm going back home to prove to Marcos that I am not afraid of him. And I want to prove to our countrymen that I am going to stand my ground even at the risk of my life. And so Ninoy realized his moment of truth had come. Since he was denied his passport by Imelda, he used another one with a striking appellation, Marcial Bonifacio. It was a play of names to denote martial law and Fort Bonifacio.
Ayun.
Ninoy's return was a countdown that the Philippine government easily started and
Yung pala yun, kaya pala yung sa nasa passport niya, ginawang Marshal Bonifacio. Tinutukoy niya dito yung first name Marshalo, yung Bonifacio naman, yung Port Bonifacio, yung matagal na panahon na pagkakakulong niya dun sa Port Bonifacio. Kaya pala Marshal Bonifacio, no, ang ginawa niyang pangalan dun sa kanyang passport. No? So, anyway, ituloy.
with our decision.
I suppose there's a physical danger because, assassination is part of public service. Look at poor President Reagan. He got shot because Hinckley fell in love with Jodie Foster. So that's part of the hazard of the game.
It's possible Ninoy knew that Marcos knew his every movement since he left Boston August 13, 1983.
My feeling is we all have to die sometime. If it's my fate to die by an assassin's bullet, so be it. But I cannot be petrified by inaction or fear of assassination, and therefore stay in a corner.
But flood tide had come.
Yeah.
And Julius Caesar it was who said, decisions were made at flood tide before the waters recede.
I think the very fact alone that we can land is victory enough.
Hesitate and all is lost.
I have promised to return. I have returned against all odds.
August sunlight was streaming down Manila when Ninoy's China Airlines plane landed at the MIA before noon.
We have to be very ready with your hand camera because this action can become very fast. In a matter of 3-4 minutes, it could be all over, And I may not be able to talk to you again after this.
Yeah.
As he descended,
Alam niya yan, oh.
3 military escorts, 25 shots rang out. Only one of them, the first, it seemed, killed Ninoy. The killing was awesome. It was also obscene. It did not square with the culture of the Filipino. It was like a hand crawling out of a slimy rock. It had an animal scream to it, a primal scream of somebody gone completely mad. It was unchristian, because it was unchristian. It roused the Christian nation first to shock, then to shame, then to quiet indignation, then to street outrage. The killing opened a huge wound across the nation's conscience. A fitful Marcos disowned the assassination. Predictably, he said the communists did it.
The killing might have received the blessings of the NPA or the communist hierarchy because they would shoot two birds with one stone. They would eliminate Aquino, who was responsible for some of the liquidation or killings, according to them.
Ironically, Ninoy got more than he bargained for. Not just the Philippines, but the whole world sat bolt upright and took notice of his unbelievable heroism. What happened on that airport tarmac that high noon fitted perfectly into a favorite quotation of Ninoy from a Chinese sage. There is a sublime feeling in all giving. A man gives us all, and we are his forever.
Lupain ng ginto't bulaklak, pag-ibig na sa kanyang halay, nag-alay ng ganda dilag, at sa kanyang yumi at ganda, dayuhan ay nahalina. Bayan ko, binihag ka, nasakta sa luha. No? Ibong mang may layang lumipad, kulungin mo at umiiyak. Bayan pa kayang sakdal dilag. Anyway, meron tayong huling tugtugin, ano? Ano ba yung huling tugtugin na yan? No, para kay Ninoy Aquino. Nasa na yun? Yung aking tama ba? Anyway, hanapin natin. Paborito ko rin kanta to eh. Nasa na ba? Nasaan ang aking kanta? Last Ray. Last Ray. Nasaan yun? Wala, no? Hindi ko na makita. Saan na siya? Anyway, ito yata. Hanapin ko lang bago tayo magtapos. Gandang kanta to, makabagbag damdamin to eh. Saan na yan? Dito. Sorry hinahanap ko lang, no. Sorry. Ito na ba? So, mapagpalang gabi sa inyo lahat, mga kababayan ko. Nahanap ko lang yung aking paboritong kanta. Narin pa ba kayo? Ito na yata. Ito na ba siya? Wala nga. Ito ba? Ito na nga. Handog handog ng Pilipino sa mundo. Tatandaan ang dog ng Pilipino sa mundo. Ang kayapa para ang pagbab katotohanan. Salamat sa inyong panunod mga kababayan ko. Thank you so much. At yung naiwan ko 3 viewers, thank you so much po sa inyong pasensya. Sa inyong thank you po. Kayo naiwan doon sa 22,000 kong viewers, naiwan 3. Thank you so much po sa inyong lahat mga kababayan ko. See you on my next vlog. God bless the Philippines.